Well, welcome to the Debt Matters podcast, where we help Canadians find solutions to their debt with licensed insolvency trustees from across Canada. I'm Wayne Kay. Today, we're going to be talking about what is inflation and how does it affect you. My guest today, Daniel Maksymchak from LC Taylor Licensed Insolvency Trustee in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and an office in Kenora, Ontario. Daniel, thanks for being here.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me back, Wayne.
You bet. Well, this is a big discussion that is probably more relevant today than it's been in 35 years, right?
Yeah, close to that for sure. It's been almost that long since we've had inflation at these rates.
And so when somebody's turning in and they're like, what does inflation mean? What is that? Can you explain it?
Well, inflation, simply put as simply as I can manage, it's the devaluation of money, basically. So this is counterintuitive to people because they're thinking, well, normally when you inflate something, it gets bigger. But in this case, it's the cost of everything else that's getting bigger, which makes the money in your pocket or the money in your savings account worth less. And it just doesn't go as far to buy as many items or services that you're looking to purchase.
Mm-hmm. And this obviously has a major impact on people who are already struggling or who are living on budgets.
Absolutely, yeah. So it can have impacts two ways, really. It can have impact directly as the cost of things go up. Due to inflation, your money's worth less, but you still have to buy the same amount of things to feed your family or run your business or that kind of thing. Your costs are going up, but your money, in most cases, stays the same. There's always a lag between when the price of everything else goes up and when you get a raise or when you see your own income rise, and your money's just not going as far. So sometimes people have to turn to debt to fill the gap, which is when it becomes a real problem, because then you're paying interest on that debt and your money's going to go even less far because you're having to service the debt as well as purchase what you used to have to purchase. And it's just a downward spiral from there. And then the second way that inflation indirectly impacts you is through what measures are taken to try to counter inflation. So inflation, the best way that they've found to try and fight inflation so far is to raise interest rates. And of course, to raise interest rates means that now you're paying more for interest. And again, there's less money that you have to purchase other goods and services. So not only is the cost of other things going up, but if you have debt, the cost of that debt is likely going to go up as well.
And I think a lot of Canadians are a little bit stressed if they own houses and are on variable mortgage rates. Everything is going up. Probably by the time we post this interview up, things will have already jumped maybe once, maybe even twice, which we haven't seen a jump for quite a while.
Yeah, that's definitely true, right? I mean, as interest rates go up, if you're on any kind of variable floating interest rate, the amount of interest that you're paying on your mortgage payments is going to go up. So your payment might not necessarily change immediately, but you're going to be paying more of your payment going towards interest as opposed to the principal, which means that when it comes time to renew, there's two negative factors impacting you. There's the fact that you haven't paid down as much as you ought to have at that point in your amortization of your mortgage. And the second thing is that, of course, you're going to be refinancing at a higher interest rate, right? So when you go to the bank and your 5-year term's over or whatever, and they're redoing the calculations, either you're locking in at a fixed rate, which is going to be higher than it was when you initially took out that mortgage, or of course your variable rate's going to be higher because mortgage rates are presumably still higher, and that's going to make your payment have to go up because you still have to pay down that mortgage in the prescribed period of time.
Mm-hmm. But the rates are still pretty good, are they not? Pretty reasonable, even if they go up a little bit?
By historical factors, that's correct. But you have to think about the portion of people's household income that is going to service debt right now, just by the sheer fact that people's debts have never been higher. So every small quarter percentage point, which is usually the increments that they raise it in, every time it goes up by a quarter of a percentage point, when you have more debt, of course, that quarter percentage point is going to impact you more than it might have impacted you 25, 30 years ago when inflation was last this high. And real estate values were a lot less. People were carrying a lot less debt, both in the forms of mortgage and consumer debt. So these quarter points, though they seem small, in terms of sheer dollars, can cause some real pain potentially.
Right. And that's a good point, because let's say 10 years ago, look at the cost of housing right across, well, in North America, in fact, it's like nowhere is safe with the rise of housing costs that have gone through the roof ever since COVID began. We've seen housing, even here in my area, that has gone up probably 50%. It's incredible jumps.
No, absolutely. And I mean, most of this has been financed by debt, right? If people want to get into the market, they're mortgaging that. And whether it's at a fixed rate now or a floating rate, when it comes time to renew, if the rates are higher, people are going to feel a significant pinch in their pocketbook.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you can do about this? Like, will they adjust, when they increase that interest rate, will that, do you think, maybe bring the housing bubble down? Like, is it a bubble? I don't even know.
Well, I'd say I'm not qualified to talk on real estate bubbles and that kind of thing. But as you said, I mean, they've gone up by such a substantial rate in the last 10, 15 years, et cetera. And, there's speculation. A lot of that is fueled by lower interest rates, right? If you have X dollars per month you can spend on housing and less of that is going to interest, then you're willing to pay more on principal, which drives up the price of the houses, right? So is the inverse going to be true? That's what we'll have to wait and find out. Is when interest rates rise, that going to, of course, limit the amount that people are able to qualify for on a mortgage and go out and finance in terms of real estate purchases? And if people aren't able to purchase at the higher prices, is that going to cause the prices to come down into a range where people can afford it based on current interest rates? Or is there enough people out there with, enough savings or equity that they've built up that they can ride it out? And aren't forced to sell until things turn around. And then if that's the case, then, a part of this real estate spike in prices has been caused, we've been led to believe, by short supply. So if less people are selling, there's going to be even shorter supply, and maybe that'll offset some of the higher interest rates and that factor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll have to wait. We need a crystal ball, that's for sure. But
that'd be nice.
I mean, the other things, of course, like when we talk about inflation, and let's say somebody's, struggling with debt, and this is what this show is about. We're here to help people who are having a tough time when it comes to debt. You're not alone. You mentioned that we've never carried higher debt than we have right now. Where is that debt? Is it on our homes? Is it in credit cards, consumer debt? What does that look like?
Generally speaking, it's across the board. I mean, obviously with higher house prices, the mortgage debt is a higher component of that. But, up until the start of the pandemic, when I believe it came down a bit as a result of some of the government programs and that slightly. But consumer debt is also very high right now, right? So, and some of those things aren't in fixed payments. A lot of people have lines of credit either against their houses or unsecured lines of credit with interest rates that float, and they're just making the interest payments. So of course, if interest rates go up, then that's going to increase that interest only portion of the payment, and they're not paying it down. They're just paying more in interest and getting less for that, or the same for those payments.
Yeah. So we talk about, how it really affects us negatively, like the disadvantage. Is there any advantage to inflation?
If you're a saver, I guess it would be good if you have some savings in the bank and you're going to start earning a higher rate of interest on that, then that would be advantageous to you, right? But at the same time, your cost of things are going to go up as well. So is it just going to offset? It depends on how much you have in savings. But I mean, in terms for us as a licensed insolvency trustee, dealing with people, of course, who usually have net negative wealth, then it's a negative thing, right? They're paying more in interest. The cost of the things that they're buying is going up, and they don't have any savings that they're earning interest on to partially offset that. So it's going to cause issues when people are having to take out debt when they're already highly leveraged. They'll have to take out debt potentially to make ends meet due to the rising cost of goods.
Is there any advice you have for people who are in that situation?
Well, I mean, you've got to really look at your debt, right? With interest rates going up, every dollar of debt that you have is going to become more and more important and more of a burden potentially. So you really have to look at your debt and say, is there anything I can do to pay this off faster, right? Can I look at my budget? Is there anywhere I can cut back to free up more monthly cash flow to pay down my debt faster so that the impact of this interest rate increase is reduced? Or, this debt that I have to these various different creditors at various different interest rates, is there any debt that I can take out to consolidate this debt? Basically borrow one loan that I can use to pay off multiple debts. And hopefully this one loan that you have is at a lower interest rate. So not only are you simplifying things by only having one payment to this new debt that paid off the rest of the debts, but you also hopefully have it at a lower interest rate. So the payments that you are making on it are going to pay down that debt faster. And I mean, if those things aren't there, you've looked at your budget, there's nowhere to cut, no one will qualify you for a consolidation loan, then, and you're still not able to make ends meet, then I would certainly talk to a licensed insolvency trustee as soon as possible so that you can get a sense of what your options are and figure out what you can do to eliminate this debt so that you're not paying the high interest rates on this debt and throwing good money after bad, essentially.
Mm. It's crazy to me that the people who need the most help get charged the highest interest rates, and the ones who don't even need help, they're taking money for other investments, but because they got a great line of credit, they get this wonderful rate. Isn't it haywire to you when I think about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not helpful for those people who need it. I mean, banks love to lend money to people who don't need it, right? Because they are confident they're going to get it back. Whereas the people who do need it, they need it because they're having a tough time making ends meet, and that's riskier to the bank, right? If these people aren't adjusting their spending habits, then this debt is just potentially growing, and this consolidation loan that they're getting isn't really solving the problem. And then when you think about some of these consolidation loans that people have to get from kind of second tier lenders, not big banks, the interest rates on those can be so high that they're doing more harm than good.
Let's touch on that. We've done shows on that before, and then just when you say that, all of a sudden, because I've learned, it just makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up in fear that somebody would do this. And we hate to slag another company, but there's a lot of them out there that once you sign on that dotted line for that loan, it can really take things sideways quickly.
It can, yeah. And unfortunately, that's part of the problem of the whole stigma of insolvency and bankruptcy. People are desperate to avoid it. Some of that might flow over the border from the United States and media there, where bankruptcy is a very different process. But people here do have a fear of bankruptcy, of course. And I mean, it is a last resort. It's not something you want to do unless you absolutely need it. But going out and seeking out these loans that are only potentially going to exacerbate the problem aren't the answer. You should definitely talk to a licensed insolvency trustee first, find out what your options are, and then make an informed decision before going into any commitment like that.
We need to mention, you can explain licensed insolvency trustees, that this is all kind of run by the government and regulated, I should say, by the government.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So myself as a licensed insolvency trustee, I hold a license issued by the federal government to administer bankruptcies and consumer proposals and other insolvency filings. And it's highly regulated. All the funds are held in trust and distributed under accordance to the law in the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act. Our accounts are audited, of course, by the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy, which is a division of the federal government. And it's highly, highly regulated. Yeah,
I think that was really what people need to understand. And if you want to make that call, and it's oftentimes it's a free consultation. The first one's a free consultation. Many times they can just point you out some ideas on what you can do and what some of your options are. I think people have this fear that as soon as they call you, that that means he's going to put me in bankruptcy, and that's far from the truth.
Absolutely, yeah. So the first consultation is free, as you said. I mean, we're not allowed to charge for the first consultation. So any licensed insolvency trustee, that's someone you want to talk to, as opposed to a debt consultant or someone like that who will, very early on in the process ask to receive money when they haven't really done anything for you yet. So you definitely want to watch out for that and call a licensed insolvency trustee who does the free consultation. We go through your situation, give different ideas unique to your situation. And then from there, you decide what you want to do. If you want to enter into a consumer proposal, you could offer that to your creditors. Or if that doesn't fail, it could be a bankruptcy, could be your best option. In some cases it is. Or if your situation isn't in that kind of position where those are your best options, then we'd suggest doing something like, approaching your bank or credit union for a consolidation loan. Or if you have equity in your house, perhaps you could borrow against it to pay off your unsecured debts and get that interest rate down. Some of those things that I talked about earlier. Or it can be something as simple as looking at your budget and, suggesting some changes that might make things more viable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can always find money in that budget. It's ridiculous the amount of $15 little monthly payments I have. Right?
Yeah. They add up, right? They add up. You got a subscription to this, or you buy a coffee daily or something like that. A lot of people come in and they don't understand where their money's going. And, it's such an eye-opening experience to fill out a budget and figure out, wow, I spend that at, restaurant lunches when I'm at work or something like that. And maybe if I brought a bagged lunch for a period of time, I could really tackle my debt and make some difference. But until you know where your money's going, you don't know how you can make changes to really help out your finances.
And it doesn't have to be comfortable. It's okay for you to be a little bit have some discomfort when it comes to these choices. We cut back to one car, and sometimes it's a pain. Sometimes we're not happy with it. But we just made the choice that having two vehicles is a ridiculous expense. And when we mathematically did it, we said, well, let's just hold off. And it was a great decision.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's things like that you think are essential. But then if you think about it a bit further, if I just had a bit of an inconvenience, I could save myself a pile of money. And then what could I do with that money later? Especially if you're paying interest on debts, then that money becomes more valuable, right? I mean, if someone has debts, basically every dollar they spend is being financed, because the opportunity cost of not putting that dollar on your debt is, 10% or whatever your average rate of interest is. So whatever you buy, you're essentially financing at 10% rate. So you got to take that into account when evaluating your spending as well.
Yeah, we're going to do another show on that kind of a topic, the whole buy now, pay later that so many people get into, and we're going to give you some strategies on dealing with that. Final words of advice regarding inflation would be?
Look at your debt. You have to look at your debt. With inflation and rising interest rates, debt is going to become more of a problem than it has been in recent years. Look at your debt, talk to a licensed insolvency trustee, and find out your options and go from there.
Terrific. This was great. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Nice to speak to you again, Wayne.
You got it. My guest today, Daniel Maksymchak from LC Taylor, licensed insolvency trustee in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and offices in Kenora, Ontario. To schedule that free consultation, you can head over to lctaylor.com. And that is it for another edition of Debt Matters Podcast. You can subscribe wherever you get your favorite podcasts from. And of course, for more information, you can always check out debtmatters.ca. Thanks very much for listening.